TitleMatchNetwork.com.
Welcome to another edition of the RF Video Shoot Interview Series. Today we are joined by a true legend in the sport of professional wrestling, Jumping Jim Brunzell. Thanks for being here with us today.
Thanks, Rob, for having me.
No problem. My very first question to you is, were you a wrestling fan growing up?
You know, when my dad was in the Navy, and in I think it was 1958 or 59, we were stationed down in Memphis, Tennessee, and I used to watch the wrestling all the time. And there was a big villain by the name of Sputnik Monroe, and the big baby face at that time was a guy named Billy Wicks, and I used to love this Billy Wicks. And when I got back to Minnesota, probably in the early 60s, I used to watch it all the time, but my folks wouldn't let me.
Wow.
It was Lawrence Welk time.
Right. Did you go to any, house shows early on?
No.
No? Okay. So how did you actually get into the business? I mean, you were a fan growing up, and then at one point you decided to go to some shows, or?
Well, when I was a walk-on freshman at the University of Minnesota football team, and I was a wide receiver, and the quarterback, who was a walk-on quarterback, was Greg Gagne. So he and I hit it off real good together. We were 17 years old, became real good friends, and really clicked on the field together. Greg stayed until his sophomore year, and then he wasn't going to play quarterback, so he moved to the University of Wyoming. And I stayed in touch with him. I went to a couple parties out at his dad's house, and I thought, geez, I mean, that was the first real millionaire that I had been involved with, you know, and he lived on the lake, and he had the Viking coaches over there, and a great steak fry and everything. So to make a long story short, I played football, had a tryout at the Washington Redskins in 1972, didn't make it, came back. Greg called me and he said, hey, do you want to try wrestling? And I said, well, why not? He said, well, Ric Flair, Ken Patera, Khosrow Vaziri, Bob Bruggers, myself, and you, and I don't want to forget anybody, but Verne decided, you know, he's going to have another camp, and he invited me, so that was it. And little did I know, if somebody would have asked me, I spent over 25 years of my life being a pro wrestler, I would have said, no way.
Huh. Well, that's a hell of a camp, too, with all those names, too.
It was. Every one of us did pretty well. Bob Bruggers and Ric Flair is still doing it, but Bob Bruggers was a great athlete at the University of Minnesota and wound up in a plane crash down in North Carolina. Actually broke his back, and from that point on he had to quit. So,
what are some of your memories of Verne Gagne's camp?
It was hard. It was 10 weeks, 6 days a week, and it was 6 hours a day.
Wow. And
we did a lot of calisthenics. We got to the point where we could do 1,000 free squats without stopping, you know, which is pretty dang good.
Right.
And Billy Robinson was the person that really trained us, and then after he worked with us all day and we were good and tired, then Verne would come in and jump on us and beat the snot out of you. Yeah.
Right. Did you ever get discouraged at all?
Yeah, I did, because I think, you know, when you don't know what to expect, and Verne Gagne's camp is a complete, let's say it's a shoot camp. I mean, you have no idea about the inner workings of pro wrestling at all. He doesn't
Smarten you up.
No, he doesn't at all. And you know, every day we're, you know, beating each other up, and Billy Robinson was teaching the submission holds, and so, you know, there was always that doubt in your mind, you know how, you know, you were thinking, well, what is this all about? How am I going to go? How am I going to do?
Do you think Verne was a little extreme with the camp?
No, I don't. I think it was a good way, because it taught us, first of all, it gave us a lot of respect for pro wrestling. And actually, I like the way he did it, because even though the timing in wrestling comes as you work in wrestling, as you know, progress. But he, as far as fundamentally, he was great. Look at the guys from the camp.
I was going to ask you some of your early memories of Ric Flair and Iron Sheik.
Well, Ric Flair was a natural. And, you know, Rick was, when he came to camp, he was almost 290 pounds, 295 pounds. And I remember when we first started, and it was like in December of '72 for our first matches. I had a couple matches with Rick, and he could lead a match, and he was incredible. He was, just like a fish being dropped in the water. Now, Khosrow Vaziri, the Iron Sheik, was totally different because when Khosrow first started, he weighed 190 pounds, and he was trim as a, if you saw pictures of him, he was incredible. But he was a babyface to begin with, and he never got the idea of, you were supposed to take care of each other. He sort of thought in his mind that he should always come on top because he was a AAU champion, So, and then once Khosrow did get the hang of it, I worked with him in North Carolina and in New York, and I've seen him. I know he's all crippled up now, but he had a pretty doggone good career.
Right. Well, I guess as far as the training goes, did you have any, did you ever, for you, what was harder, psychology or learning how to bump?
Oh, definitely psychology, without a doubt, because, there was a couple guys that were really good. I mean, Rick Steamboat right away, and like I said, Ric Flair. But for a normal guy like me, somebody who, was an athlete all of his life, to get in the ring and you have to learn that timing, and the only way you learn it is by doing it. And then also the guys that you work with are so incredibly important, to your timing. And I was so fortunate in the AWA; they had just an incredible amount of talent. Ray Stevens, Nick Bockwinkel, Bobby Heenan, Billy Robinson. They had just an unbelievable amount of guys that really helped us out.
I'm definitely going to ask you all about the talent in AWA. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess what was the biggest misconception that you had about the business before you got into it?
Well, I tell you, I was spoiled when I wrestled in the AWA because everything was sort of cut and dried. I wrestled there for a little bit, and they sent me down to Kansas City. I came back. I went to Japan, then they came back, and they made me Greg's, partner, and we were the High Flyers, from roughly 75, and then I left in 79 and came back in 80, 81. But I think I got spoiled because everybody knew their place. When you get into other territories, there's a lot of cutthroat manipulating, and not backstabbing, but there's more politicking, and there wasn't that in the AWA.
For you, what was the hardest thing to grasp in training?
Oh, geez. I don't know. I think the hardest thing was pacing yourself because wrestling being in the sport it is, pro wrestling, you can't go out there and and in 2 minutes and blow all your energy and then you're high, you're right. Dragging your tongue. So I think the hardest thing for me during I was so energized by going into the ring, and I was so nervous about making a mistake that I got tired quick. I tired myself out. And then I think that was a big thing for me to learn how to, just relax in the ring and be more comfortable.
Anybody ever try to stretch you? Take liberties with you at all?
Oh, gosh. Billy Robinson, when he trained us, he taught us pretty well. So, and I had a pretty good rapport with most of the guys, all the guys. I don't think I ever had a real problem in the ring. And I know in Japan, the first time I went to Japan in 1974, a guy cracked me and I cracked him right back. And then, there's a different feeling out over there. And I was a young kid, I was 23 years old going over there, and I didn't know anybody.
Right.
So I remember Tony Marino, who I think he's from Philly.
Right.
Yeah. He was screaming in the back. He says, "Get on top of him, Jimmy," and encouraging me, So I really don't think, there's been a lot of stiff guys that I worked with, but I didn't mind that.
How much, of the business was kayfabe to you when you first were training? Did they?
All of it.
All of it? Okay.
100%.
So
that's the way Verne was.
Right.
And he frowned on anybody, violating that. And I like that too, because, and that's one thing, and you might ask me this, that was the big deal in New York, it became so lax, and Vince had a totally different outlook on it in terms of what he wanted his product to be, as far as sports entertainment compared to the old timers, like Graham's and Gagne and all the rest of the different Pat O'Connor and.
I guess what are some of your early memories of your first match?
Oh, geez, I was in Moorhead, Minnesota, and I know the exact date. It was December 27th, and it was 1972, and it was Dennis Stamp. Oh. Dennis Stamp was an amateur wrestler that Verne Gagne had trained, and we were going to do a 15-minute Broadway, and I wanted to do so good, and I'd never worked with Dennis before, and I was just blown up after about 5 minutes, and I came in. I'll never forget this. I came in and I kicked this garbage can, and Dusty Rhodes was on the card that night. He said, "Hey, Jimmy, don't worry about it. You just relax." But I wanted to make sure that everything you want to do well, but, and you think, well, now I'm a pro wrestler, and, I was a football player, and I was a basketball player, and I did this, and I did that. It should relate to pro wrestling, but it doesn't.
Right.
It's a totally different game.
Do you think a lot of today's pro wrestlers can make it through the camp?
I don't know, because I don't know what they're subjected to now. Verne, and I think Verne paid us. Yeah, I think he paid us like $500 a week. Just to have some money, which was good. And then although he did hook me at the end for 10% of my gross for 5 years, I had to pay him. I think I was the only one that paid him too. But I don't know. I think if a guy really wants to be a pro wrestler and that's his dream, he could do it.
Who do you consider your mentor early on?
Oh, geez. Well, Verne was very good to me. Don Morocco was good. Billy Robinson. I really thought he was great, even though he wasn't very well liked in the game because he had a reputation for stretching people, but he was brilliant in the ring.
You sparred with Billy a little bit, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, gosh, he'd tie you up so quick it was unbelievable. And Nick Bockwinkel helped me a lot. Bobby Heenan helped me a lot, and then also when I went to Kansas City for my first opportunity when I started, it was 73. Terry Funk helped me, and Jack Briscoe.
Wow.
Which were great guys.
Right. I was gonna say. Who did you travel with early on in the AWA?
Well, we all drove then, So usually it was Bob Bruggers, myself, Greg Gagne, maybe Billy Robinson, Wahoo McDaniel. And we'd drive, we had to drive to Winnipeg, we'd drive to Milwaukee, sometimes we'd drive to Chicago, we'd drive to Green Bay. The only place that we flew to was Denver.
Right.
But we drove quite a bit. And like I say, everybody was pretty happy with their position in the AWA because everybody knew you were going to make a good amount of money, and at the same time you're going to have time off. So you can enjoy your family. And in the summertime, you hardly worked. You worked maybe 3 times a week.
What was the schedule like in the winter?
The winter, we probably worked 4 times a week.
Right.
As
far as the AWA goes, in those days, what was the locker room like? You had a lot of talent, obviously.
Yeah. It was, there might have been some underlying pettiness where one guy thought I should be on top, but everybody was making good money, and everybody sort of rotated, that would get an opportunity, to either wrestle Verne or they had a great bunch of heels there, Mad Dog Vachon, and there was just Billy Superstar Graham. So they just rotated everybody, and I think everybody was pretty happy.
How did you wind up in Central States?
Well, Verne and Bob Geigel and Pat O'Connor were good friends. And Verne said, Jim, you need an opportunity to season yourself. You need to wrestle every day. And so he said, I want you to go down to Kansas City for a little bit.
Right.
That's what he said. Well, I was down there for about 10 months. But so I get down there, and you'd wrestle twice a night. You'd open up in a single match, and then you'd come back in a tag every single night. And then sometimes you'd come back in a third match if there was a battle royal or, whatever. So I really got a lot of experience in the ring, and that helped me immeasurably. And you worked almost every day down there, even though you didn't make that much money. The guys that went to St. Louis on Friday night made the money, but in my case, I never went to St. Louis while I was down there. I always went to St. Joe TV, which was horrible because you were on live for 90 minutes and they only had 3 matches. So you'd wrestle about 45 minutes on, for $25.
You teamed up with Mike George, I think.
Yes.
What are your memories of Mike?
Mike was a good man, good guy, and a real good. He later on he became a better heel. He was like 6'1" and about 255, and good guy. And the reason they put us together as a tag, initially they put us against each other, and we used to have 30-minute babyface matches, and we were both young guys, and nobody wanted to look bad, and we were giving and taking, and I thought he was very good. It was a good experience for me because we won the Central States Championship, and I think we beat Lord Alfred Hayes and Roger Kirby.
I was going to ask you your memories of Lord Alfred Hayes.
A great guy. Well, and I feel so sorry I missed his death. He was a great guy, brilliant Mike. The interviews he did were just incredible. And, he was fairly old when he was working in Kansas City, and he had that real stand-up sort of Wigan style English,
right?
And he was just a great guy, and he and I got along great.
What about Bob Geigel? What are your memories of Bob Geigel?
Well, Bob Geigel was a good old boy, and I think Bob was very content in just running a small little area, just enough to make him money. He made his money in St. Louis, and he didn't want to rock the boat. He didn't want to, he used to come in shorts all the time, shorts and shower shoes. That's the way he'd come to the matches,
Right.
And I'll never forget this happened. Verne, I got my first week's check, and gosh, it was $150, and I had wrestled like 5 or 6 times. 5 or 6 days, a couple times a night. And I thought, Jesus Christ, I can't make this. So I called Verne. I said, Verne, so he called Geigel, and then Geigel chewed me out. He said, what the hell are you calling Verne? And I said, well, he's my boss.
Right.
No, he says, I'm your boss. So from that point on, I started making about $500 a week, which, if I wouldn't have piped up, I never would have made that.
Wow. What was Verne like as a promoter?
Oh, gosh. Well, Verne is a very egotistical guy. He had nothing when he was coming up, and wound up acquiring a lot of wealth. So he really lived the American dream, and it was either his way or the highway, and he made that known too.
Whose idea was it to team you up with Greg?
I really don't know. I imagine it was probably Verne or Wally Carbo. I had just come back from, I was in Japan, and I was over there for, 3 or 4 weeks, and I couldn't wait to come back to Hawaii and rest. So I'm there the second day of Hawaii, and I get a call to call Wally. So Wally says, you got to come home tomorrow. And I says, oh, no. I've just been through a 4 or 5 week tour in Japan getting the crap beat out of me, and I was looking forward to spending some time on the beach. So I only had 2 days in Hawaii. I made the next TV show in Minneapolis, and they tagged Greg and I up.
Wow. You went over for New Japan or All Japan?
All Japan.
All Japan? Okay.
Yeah.
What are your memories about Giant Baba?
He was a good guy. He was a great guy, and I was over there a number of different times, and I had an opportunity to work with him. And at that time, he was getting up there in age, and his finish, he'd throw you in, and he'd put the big boot.
Right.
So he throws me in, and I'm running off the ropes, and he hits me with the big boot, and I take a big bump. And when I took the bump, my legs sort of wishbone down, and they hit him in the leg, and all of a sudden he went woo woo, and he fell over backwards.
Wow, that's awesome.
He still covered me, and then also Steamboat and I were over there together, and we both decided not to shave. So he came up to me one day and he said, "Jim, you baby face, you shave, okay?" I said, "Okay." He was a good guy.
Memories of Ricky Steamboat.
Great.
Early on.
Great. Rick Steamboat he's one of my closest friends. I heard he had some bad health. I've called him a couple times. He didn't return my call. So when I went down to Charlotte in 1979, he and Flair had that place on fire. It was incredible. He got a reaction. The only person that I saw as a babyface get that reaction out of crowds consistently was Hulk Hogan. Rick Steamboat was a tremendous star in the Mid-Atlantic, and he was a good guy. He was just, and I worked with him in Japan. He's a great worker too. God, just a great worker.
I'm definitely going to ask you a lot about Crockett territory coming up.
Okay.
Going back to AWA and Greg Gagne, did you like Greg from an early on standpoint? Obviously, you said you grew up with him.
I did, and it was a hard relationship because Greg is the son of the promoter.
That was my next question.
Yeah, and it was hard for me because I had to sort of bite my tongue and figure, well, you're not going to get what Greg gets, because at one time Greg had a Mercedes and he had a 25-foot big boat with a 200 horsepower engine, and then he had a 455 Trans Am, and he had a $350,000 house, and I had a 75 Capri, but that's just goes with the territory. He was the boss's son. Sometimes he'd pull a little bit of rank with me, but sometimes maybe I needed it, because I sort of got in that habit. I knew this was my sort of lot, and I knew deep down inside I wanted to have matches with Nick Bockwinkel, which they finally gave me. But it was a good relationship. It just got to the point where I knew I wasn't going to go any further, and I just was tired of the whole scene. So I went up to Verne one time and I said, "I'm leaving," and it just flabbergasted him. And that's when I went to Charlotte for the 18 months in '79.
Before you went, I want to talk about some of the talent that you worked with. You mentioned Nick Bockwinkel. What are your early memories of Nick?
He's great. He was one of the greatest performers that I ever worked with. He was hard. I mean, when you went an hour draw with him, it was, I remember the first time I wrestled him an hour draw in St. Paul, my hometown, in St. Paul Auditorium. And we had a heck of a match, gosh, and it was a blow-by-blow, bing, bing. And Nick would, he was stiff, and he liked to be stiff in the ring. So I remember there was about 40 seconds left in the match, and it was my turn to make a comeback, and he stopped me, and he hit me right in the damn solar plexus, so all the wind just went like that, and he says, "Keep coming, Jimmy!" And I was just fighting, I could barely breathe, and I had to muster everything I could to hit him with a drop kick, And he was great, though, and he was a professional every inch of the way. He was a great guy for interviews and great in the ring.
Memories of the Blackjacks?
Well, Jack Lanza, actually, in Mulligan, the only time that I worked with Mully was when Mully was a babyface down in Charlotte. Jack Lanza was partners with Bobby Duncombe in the AWA. Jack Lanza had good timing in the ring. He didn't look very the part. He wasn't muscular. He was sort of raw boned. And matter of fact, he'd hit you with an elbow and hurt you because his elbows were so sharp. But he knew his place, and actually he made more money when he went to New York as an agent. And I think he's still on the payroll.
Yeah, I think he is too.
Yeah. So, and Jack Mulligan was a great guy. I mean, we had some great times, made a lot of trips with him down in Charlotte. Good guy.
Memories of your matches with Bobby Duncombe and Blackjack Lanza?
Very good. And I think the fact that in the AWA, there was only like 12 guys or 14 guys. So everybody knew their part. And when Bobby Duncombe and Jack would work with Greg and I mean, it was just a 50-50, and we had the crowds every single night. And Greg and I always sold our ass off. And then, when it was time to make the comeback, they were there. And, they were good. And then Bobby Heenan was their manager, so you couldn't go wrong.
Early memories of Bobby the Brain.
The greatest. By far, and the funniest. He and I Verne bought a plane, and it was called the 59919er, and we were all petrified. And it was a 7-passenger Navajo Chieftain, non-pressurized, so you fly at 6,000 to 8,000 feet, and you can never get above the weather. So, and Bobby and I sat in the back seat together, and Bobby always had a box of Franzia wine. So as soon as we got in the plane, he'd pour a big water glass full of wine, and we'd drink on the way to the matches. And then on the way back, it was vodka or rum.
Right.
But he and I had just a great time, and I love him dearly. And he's been through just hell with this cancer and trying to reshape his jaw. And I'm going to go down to Florida in end of October. See my mother-in-law, and I plan on seeing him. But he was the greatest. I mean, he not only was he the greatest manager, but when he got in the ring, it was like a night off, because he gave everything the fans wanted to see every single night. He was incredible. Only an 8th grade education.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
And he was raised by his mom. He didn't really know his dad, and started when he was like 14 years old carrying, ring jackets for the Bruiser.
One of the best talents in the world.
Oh, without a doubt, the best manager by far.
I agree, 100%. What about your memories with Patterson and Stevens?
Oh, geez. Ray Stevens was so talented that it was just like flipping on a switch, and it was so easy. It was like working with a ghost in there. He was so light, but everything he did, his mannerisms, the way he sold, his timing was incredible. And Pat was good too, but Pat had to work a lot better, a lot harder than Ray. Ray was just a natural. Ray was incredible.
Did you ever wrestle a Harley Race or Larry Hennig back then?
Yes. I wrestled Harley. Well, I didn't wrestle Harley until I got into the Mid-Atlantic. But Larry Hennig used to beat the crap out of me all the time. And he helped me establish the fire that you need to get, because I wanted to kill him, because he used to kick the crap out of me. I mean, literally beat the snot out of you at night. And he was a big guy, Larry was 6'3", 300 pounds, and I mean, he'd stiff as heck. He'd kick. I remember at night, after the matches, I'd see the eyelets of his boots across my chest and sternum for where he'd kick me. I told him one night, I said, Doc, after the match, I grabbed a chair and I said, if you would have walked through that door, you were going to get it. And he says, you're glad I didn't walk through that door? And I said, I probably am.
Did you get injured playing, I guess, a softball game or something when you were in AWA at all?
Yes.
What happened there? Was Verne upset with that?
No, what happened was, and he was there too, it was a Jerry Lewis telethon softball game. It was the wrestlers against the media. And we were wearing shorts. It was a hot day, and I slid, and I got like a big strawberry on my calf. The outside, I didn't think anything of it. Well, after the game, it was so warm, we went over to Dick Addison, who was a doctor and a lifelong friend of Verne's, his house for some cocktails, and we went swimming in his pool. Well, I got staph infection in my leg.
Wow. And
I got sicker than a dog, and my legs swelled up, and I couldn't wrestle for about 4 or 5 weeks. And I had to have intravenous, antibiotics for 2 or 3 days. And although Verne used that as a great ploy, because they switched the belts without beating us.
Right.
So, and then when we did come back, it made a lot of sense. But and Verne paid me too. Well, I was not exactly what I was making, but I was out for 4 or 5 weeks, and it worked good. But it was just a quirk deal.
How did you wind up going to work for Crockett?
Well, like I said, I had sort of gotten to the point where I was tired in the AWA. I knew I was only going to go as far as Greg and myself, and I had some opportunity, matches with Nick and did well, but I could see that they were never going to, do anything with me, and I didn't want to switch. I didn't want to be a heel. So, I knew Flair, and George Scott, who was the booker in Charlotte, used to wrestle in the AWA when I first started. So I called George and asked him if there was any opportunity, and he said, yeah, come on down. So I went down there, and it was a great experience, but, he worked the snot out of you. Mm-hmm. You worked every single day. You never had any time off. The only good thing about Charlotte was the weather was good, and you were home almost every night, even though you drove. But, he'd do double shots on Saturday and Sundays, and you never had time off. And I had 2 little kids. My kids were like, 2.5 and 6 months old down there. And but, we survived. It was a great time. Talk about driving. We drove every night except when there was a pilot down there named Freddie Fearless, and he was a good friend of Ric Flair's. And we'd fly with him. We'd get 5 or 6 guys and pay $100 to fly up to Richmond and back so we could get home early.
Any good road stories?
Oh, jeez. Oh, gosh. I'm trying to remember from Charlotte. Well, I can tell you one. Dino Bravo, God rest his soul. He and I were in a town called Franklin, West Virginia, and that next day we had to do Raleigh TV. So I think it was Tuesday. We're in this Franklin, West Virginia on a Monday, and we did the matches and everything, and we were in the car, and Dino had a big Lincoln, and we're driving. I told Dino, I said, you run out of gas, let's stop and get gas. No, Jimmy, he said, we got enough. So we keep driving. All of a sudden, we're in this one hick little town, and we run out of gas. And it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and we're 90 miles from Raleigh, and I'm just pulling my hair out. I thought, oh, God, because Raleigh was an all-day deal. You got up early in the morning, you did interviews all day, and then you wrestled a couple tapes, and then you might even have to go to a town that night and wrestle. And I said, doggone it, and we couldn't get anybody to help us. There was nobody on the road.
Right.
So finally, I can't remember if a cop came by, but we didn't get to Raleigh until 7 o'clock in the morning, and I was beside myself. And that was one, nothing really happened. But when you think if we would have stopped an hour earlier to get gas, but he says, no, we're going to drive straight through. I got enough gas in this big hog.
Huh. Memories of Ric Flair around this period of time in the Carolinas. What was he like?
Well, Rick was a totally different person in the ring than he was socially. He had a lot of, he had a lot of baggage from day one, and it was sort of hard being Ric Flair because he had an image that he wanted to continue to live, and at the same time he had a wife and family, and he was incredible though. The business, I think the whole trouble with Rick, and this is just my own personal opinion, was he let the business run him. He lived for the business, and you can't do that.
A lot of people said he can't separate the business from reality.
I agree. He's a nature boy, and I'll tell you a little story. He and I, we're in St. Louis airport at the St. Louis Marriott, and we had some good matches. He was a champ then. I think he was the NWA champ, and he was buying drinks for everybody, and he was running out of money, and he says, can I borrow $20? And I said, sure. So I give him the $20, and he said, you want another drink? And I said, sure. I said, I'll have a rum and coke, and he got a vodka tonic, and it was like $6, or $7. So he gives the girl the $20, and he says, keep the tip. And I said, Rick, that was my 20. He says, what the heck, I'll pay you back.
Did he pay back?
Yeah, I did.
I was going to say. Memories of Ricky Steamboat from this period of time. You pretty much mentioned them. You said he was a hot baby face.
Oh, he was incredible, and we made a lot of Jay Youngblood and Ricky were real close, and myself really had a good time. Like I say, Rick was just, he was a huge star, and you never know it. He was always the same Rick Steamboat, and he treated his fans very, very well. and they respected him for it. And I think everybody respected Verne. I know George Scott loved him to the point where when George Scott was booking in the WWF, I think he wanted to move Steamboat into rivaling Hulk.
Right. I remember.
Yeah.
I heard that.
Yeah, so I think that sort of put the kibosh on George Scott.
Right. Memories of Dusty Rhodes, and did you get along with Dusty?
Dusty Rhodes was a character that I really enjoyed because even though he was not really in shape, but he had great timing in the ring, and he was an incredible interviewer. And I used to, when you listen to guys like him and Superstar Graham and then Wahoo McDaniel and Dickie Murdoch, when Dick Murdoch and Dusty Rhodes came into Minneapolis, they just, oh gosh, it was incredible. And they did some crazy stuff too. They rode a donkey into a bar there one night, and Verne was never knowing what they were going to do. I remember one night at dang Murdoch. I don't know if you heard of Dickie Murdoch.
Yeah, that 100%.
Okay. So Dick Murdoch and Dusty Rhodes were coming back from Winnipeg, and they're drinking beer and throwing it out the window, and we're seeing these beer bottles, come flying by the car. So they stop at the customs, and it's me and Morocco and somebody else in the car behind, and Murdoch jumps out, and as we're standing there, he says, "See those guys?" He says, "They're all on drugs. You better check them out." And he said that to the customs guy, and I thought, Dick, what in the heck are you doing?
Right.
And he did it laughingly, and I thought, oh God, because Morocco liked some smoke. Everybody did,
Right.
And I thought, oh Christ, we're going to get stopped at the border, but the guys just let us through.
Yeah, lucky.
Yeah.
Memories of Jim Crockett Jr.
Oh geez. I didn't know Jim Crockett very well because he sort of disassociated himself with the business.
Right.
I mean, he liked the idea that he was making a lot of money, but to me, Jimmy didn't have that much of a personality, and he didn't know much about the wrestling business. He was very fortunate that he had George Scott there and Sandy Scott, and he had all the talent he had. Because I think he was very lucky to wind up, and I don't know if he sold his business to Turner at the end or what, but I'm sure he came out very well financially.
Did you work with Ray Stevens too in the Mid-Atlantic area?
Yes, matter of fact, I beat Ray for the Mid-Atlantic belt.
Right.
Heavyweight, and it was Ray was great, and we had worked in Mini before, and he was getting older, but we had good matches, and it was funny down there. I mean, one of my hardest matches ever that I had, and I'll tell you this little story. Khosrow, the Iron Sheik, had got a break there, and he had the gimmick boot, bing, bing, bing.
Right.
So we're wrestling. I have the Mid-Atlantic title. We're wrestling on TV. He does the boot, boom, and he beats me. So he gets the belt. So I wrestle him on TV. I put him out in the sleeper. I grab his boot, and I said, and we're wrestling in Roanoke the following Sunday. And then we wrestled in Charlotte that night. And I grabbed the boot, and I said, I'm going to beat the Iron Sheik with his own boot. So I've got his boot on. I wrestle him in Roanoke, and the match started at like 2 o'clock. And George Scott made us go through an hour. And I said to George, what in the hell type of finish is that? I said, you killed me. I said, you might as well buried me right in the middle of the ring, because if a babyface can't beat the heel with his own gimmick... And George's explanation to me was, oh, we'll fool the people.
Probably killed the town?
I'm glad I didn't go back there for a little bit, because it really killed me, and it was hard, too, because Khosrow could not lead a match over 10 minutes. And we went an hour, and then we also went 45 minutes that night in Charlotte. So that was like pulling teeth without Novocaine.
You also worked with Ken Bater, members of Ken?
Yep. Oh, Ken was good. Well, Kenny and I matter of fact, I just talked to him a couple weeks ago. He lives in a suburb of St. Paul, Woodbury, Minnesota, and he's done quite well now. He's 66 or 67 years old. And Ken was very good in the ring in that, when you saw him, he was very athletic for a big guy. He could jump like a son of a gun, and he had good timing. And I remember he always used to grab me in the turnbuckle, and he'd beel me, and he'd throw me so high that I'd hit, and then my legs would be in the other turnbuckle. And I knew it, and he'd do that on the suplex with me too. But we were down in Charlotte together, and matter of fact, I think, we had a little deal there too for the Mid-Atlantic title. But Kenny was a great guy, and sort of got himself into his own trouble, his own stew. But and he never took any bunk from the promoters. He always let them know,
Right.
how he felt about things, and he was just, like I say, there was very few guys that I didn't enjoy working with.
You also worked with John Studd. Remember
Yes.
working with John?
There was another guy. John was a nice guy, but oh man, was he hard to work with, because John's image of himself, he was almost a giant, 6'10". How is he going to have a match with me?
Selfie and all that.
Yeah, at 6'1" at 225 pounds. And I said, John, it's a work. That's how you're going to have a match with. But he says, how will people believe it? And I says, we'll make them believe it.
Right.
And John was geared to matches of like 5 to 8 minutes. And down in Charlotte, he and I used to work 25 minutes, and he had sort of like a respiratory problem, and he'd start coughing in the ring after about 12 minutes, uncontrollably.
Right.
And the nicest guy, and I know he passed away, and he died too early, but he was the nicest guy outside of the ring. It was just a little hard in the ring because he had that concept that he was a giant.
Buddy Rogers. Memories of the Nature Boy Buddy Rogers.
Do you want me to tell you a quick story about Buddy Rogers?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Buddy Rogers was a great, great talent in the 50s, early 60s, and he came into Charlotte, and the guy was in incredible shape, and he had to be close to 60 years old when he came down there. And I remember his main involvement was to help George, not do anything. Well, in a matter of a few weeks, he had all the heat on him in the territory. So we're having this one match. It was a tag team match, and I think it was Steamboat and I against him and Jimmy Snuka. So it's my turn to get in the ring with him on a comeback. And at that time, his gimmick was that when the people would yell at him when he was doing his interviews, he'd put these big Band-Aids over his ears so he couldn't hear them. So he had these two big Band-Aids over his ear, and he had another big Band-Aid across his chest. So I'm making the comeback, and I'm rifle him in the corner, bing, 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 and I tear one of his Band-Aids off his ear, and the crowd goes completely crazy. I tear the other one off, so I see this one on his chest, and I tear it off, and he screams. He had been in a sunbed and blistered himself, and I just pulled it off, and he screamed. And as I went to bail him, he said, "If you had any more time, I bet you'd take my boots off." That's what he said to me.
That's awesome.
Yeah. He told me, he said, Jimmy, this is one day he looked at me, he says, Jimmy Brunzell, he says, you've got it all. But if you had timing, you'd be great.
Wow. AWA, you went back to that territory after
Yes.
Crockett. How did that come about?
Well, I knew that the timing would be right for me to come back. A year and a half. And I think Verne sort of liked that idea that I'd come back because it'd give Greg and I new life. It'd give the AWA a rest from, the high flyers. And when we came back, we had a built-in program with Adrian Adonis and Jesse that just took off. And it was funny because Jim Crockett, not Jim Crockett, who was the promoter in Atlanta? God.
In Atlanta?
Yeah, the main guy. Doggone it.
Barnett?
Yeah. Jim Barnett
Right.
said to me, Jimsy, he said, what do you really want in your career? And I said, well, I'd like to be the world champion because the world champion makes the most money.
Right.
And he said, well, do you want to stay here with me? And I said, no, I think I'm going to go up to the AWA. And he said, Jim, that'll be the biggest mistake of your life. And I said, well, Jim, I said, that's my home, and that's where I'm going to go. And it's that that first year I came back was the biggest year I ever had in the business. $85,000 I made, which wasn't bad.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, when you went back to the AWA, you were, headlined outside that territory. Did you have a lot more respect from the guys when you went back?
I don't think so. I think they just welcomed me. They probably thought that it was good for me to go, and get some outside. You see how different areas are run, and you see how different guys work in the ring. And the really, what I saw when I went to Charlotte, and then, New York a little bit. But Charlotte, I saw the way the guys met with George Scott to manipulate themselves for following matches, and I couldn't do that. I told George, I said, I'm not a booker, man. I said, I just want to work.
Did the locker room change at all when you went back to the AWA, or was it pretty much the same core guys?
Yeah, I think it was the same.
What about Greg? Did he change at all?
Well, I think Greg might have resented the fact that I left, but at the same time he was happy because it made him better.
Right.
I mean, Greg Gagne was a hell of a worker, man. He was a incredible worker. He had great timing. The only thing, he didn't have the size. And both of us together worked good with the different teams because the teams would fly for us.
Right.
So, I mean, we became, sort of like the David and Goliath. And I think Greg appreciated the fact that I was back, so it was better for him in the area.
Memories of your matches with Jesse the Body Ventura and Adrian Adonis, and what were they like outside the ring?
Oh, geez. Well, Adrian carried the team in the ring. Jesse Ventura was probably the most uncoordinated guy in the ring you ever want to meet. He was great on the stick. He could do great interviews. But geez, he was so unathletic in the ring. Honest to God, and he was scared to death you were going to hurt him. And
I heard that from a lot of people.
Yeah, and backing up and everything. Where Adrian could do anything. And Adrian's biggest problem was that he got himself out of shape. He gained all that weight. But, oh, God, he was great for the timing. He and I used to have some matches where the timing was just bing, 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 bang, boom, boom. And the heat was there and the comeback was there, and it was just a pleasure working with them. But that East-West connection did incredible because they were younger guys. Jesse was more or less a hometown guy, even though he said he was from Hollywood or wherever the hell he was from. And he had that air about him that, that really got over with the people. And then Adrian just got it done in the ring.
What about Jerry Blackwell and Ken Batera? You guys worked with them as well?
Yep. Jerry Blackwell, for a big guy, incredible worker. Great timing, great intellect for the ring. He's another guy who didn't take care of himself. You can't eat 5 pounds of Cracker Jacks and 3 liters of pop a day and expect not to get sick.
Right.
And when he and well, it was him and Patera, and then Adnan Al-Casey was the manager, and they did that little gimmick good. I mean, it worked good. It was easy working with those guys, and I think we made a lot of money with it.
No, this is when you went over to All Japan, I guess, again during this period of time too, right? For Baba.
Yes.
And you teamed with Nick over there, I think.
Yes. This was right before I came back from Charlotte.
Right.
I went over there and Nick and I were teamed. And we had a real good run. They had, let's see.
I think Steamboat was there too. You were.
Yeah, Steamboat and Slater were together. Dickie Slater. And then they had Les Norton and Billy Robinson together. Oh, that was a hard match. Holy Jesus. But we did it. We did like a 45-minute draw. With them.
Did you like living in Japan when you were over there? Or?
You know what? I can't say enough about Japan. The people were so accommodating. The hardest thing for Americans was, the first time I went over there, it was like 1974, was once you got outside of Tokyo, they weren't westernized. So you had to eat a lot of fish or rice, and they didn't have, in Tokyo they had McDonald's and they had Shakey's Pizza, and it was great,
Right.
But as you went to the different parts of Japan, I'd always lose weight, so I'd bring over tuna and chicken and protein shakes. I'll never forget the custom guy. I go over there. I don't know how many times I went over there, but it was probably the third time. And he opens up my bag, and I had about 12 bottles of this protein. He says, "What's that?" I said, "Protein." And I go like this. He said, "Okay, out."
How long were your tours over there for?
Usually they were for, I think, 3 or 4 weeks, and I had one 5-week one.
Wow.
Greg and I had a couple 2-week ones,
Going back to AWA, what are your memories of the Otto Vaughn's title change?
Oh, geez. Well, I think it was ridiculous as a standpoint. Nobody knew they were going to do it. Otto Vance was a nice guy. He's a promoter in Austria. And the only reason why Verne did it was so Verne could go over in Austria and wrestle for the heavyweight championship. That was simple. That was the only way. And Otto was so out of shape. A nice guy, though. Real nice guy, but he from what the people, here you got guys like Bockwinkel and Superstar Graham and some of the other heels, Patera. And then you look at Otto Vance, 6'2", 300 pounds, and sort of sloppy with his lederhosen on,
right?
And could barely get up. He had a battle royal there, and he couldn't get into the ring, and everybody started laughing. I felt sorry for him. He grabbed onto the second rope and tried to pull himself in, and fell off the doggone apron, and God, he was the world champion.
Memories of Hulk Hogan in AWA.
Well, you know what? When Hulk first came in, he was real quiet, big guy, and I'll never forget. I'll tell you a little story. He came in, and John Sullivan was his manager, and he was doing all these little card tricks and stuff like this, and he says, you're going to see a real ace in this business. So they brought Hulk in to be a heel, and he beat 2 guys, and the people fell in love with him. And all of a sudden, that killed Verne's ego, because here you got a big, muscle-bound, blonde-haired guy, that looked like a surfer, that was a bass player, guitar player. All of a sudden, he became the biggest wrestling event in the AWA, and Verne couldn't take it.
Even though it was good for business?
No, it hurt his ego.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I'll tell you, Hulk was living in a hotel in Bloomington, and it was during the winter, and I said, Hulk, why don't you come over and you can have dinner at my house? And he said, okay. So he had this old Lincoln car, and it was cold as heck. Gosh, it was about 10 below. And he pulled in, and I had, I made some porterhouse and some shrimp. And my son was really young then. He was like 4 years old. So, and my son never saw a guy as big as Hulk with the blonde hair and everything. So Hulk went downstairs, and I brought some cheese and crackers, and I said, I'll be upstairs, cooking. So, and I gave him a beer or whatever it was. So I'm cooking, and then I come back downstairs, and my son, little Jimmy, had kept filling Hulk's mouth full of these little square pieces of cheese. And Hulk says, "Son, tell your son I don't want any more cheese." But Hulk was a good guy, and a lot changed. The old adage is, I think, money does change people.
Right. I'll ask you about Hogan as
Okay.
far as WWE, WWF run and how it changed coming up. Bobby Heenan was there as well, you had mentioned, and Mean Gene Okerlund.
Yep.
Memories of Mean Gene as an announcer?
Yes, he was a great guy. We had a lot of party times with him, and he was a natural too, and he had his little sayings, and when he was groomed, he had an ad agency in Minneapolis, and he was doing pretty well, and this interviewing deal was sort of like a part-time deal, and all of a sudden it took off, and when he left the AWA, it hurt,
right?
Because he was a big star,
right,
and
right.
he was great. I mean, I think I used to tell him, I'd say, Gina, I said, if you had hair, I said, you'd be on network TV, and he used to get pissed off at me.
That was one of my questions, actually, is memories when Hogan and Okerlund and Heenan all left around the same period. That's when Vince started expanding.
Yep.
How bad did that hurt the company?
It hurt it.
Right.
Very bad. And Verne, it's funny, and I'll tell you a story relating to me. At this time, I had my own gym. In '82, I started my own gym, and Hulk came in at '82. In '82 and '83, really just popped that territory, and then went to Vince, and then it sort of shut down. So when people started going to New York, all of a sudden, the house started getting down, and then all of a sudden Vince's TV got broader and broader and broader. And I told, and this is the reason why I left. In '85, I asked Verne, I said, I got to have a guaranteed contract. I says, I'll stay here as long as you want, and be Greg's partner, but I said, I've got to make more money. I said, I've got my family and I've got my gym. And he got all pissed off at me that I opened this gym. And he said, well, what do you want? And I said, I want a $95,000 guarantee. And he looked at me right in the face and he said, you're not worth it. So 2 days later, I left.
Did you already have a deal with WWE?
Well, I had called,
right.
and George Scott says, come on in.
I'm going to ask you about that. I got
Okay.
a couple more AWA questions, then we'll go right to WWE.
Okay.
Memories of young Kurt Hennig. Were you there when Kurt came into
Yes.
the territory?
Yeah, Kurt was a good kid.
You saw his potential right away?
Oh, incredible potential. And he got on the weights and, just had a knack. He was a natural. And I knew, he was there for a little bit, and I think he went to Oregon.
Right.
And yeah. And, his dad and I are still close to this day. I knew he was going to be, exceptional.
Any memories early on of his ribs, or did he not start ribbing people until he had some time behind him?
I think he
was really green when he first.
Yeah, and I think he sort of, bit his time a little bit.
Right.
But then when he went out to Oregon and then got on the road a little bit and see how these characters reacted with one another, I think it gave him an opportunity to start doing his own thing. Yeah, he was quite a ripper.
Memories of Bruiser Brody.
Jeez, he was a good guy. Frank was a good guy, and I really didn't realize that until after I worked with him. But he and I did a little. I had got kicked in the testicles, and I had a little blood clot in there, so I had to have it out. Brody comes to the AWA, so Verne says, we're going to have you work with him on TV and have him jump off the top rope and land on your stomach, and then you'll have the surgery and you'll be out. So that's what we did. So they put a little heat on him, and then in the interim, Brody was working for Verne in Denver, and something happened with the fan, and Brody slapped the fan or something, and then Verne didn't back him. So the big buildup, I'm coming back against Brody, who I liked, but Frank was so, you never know if you're going to get a Dr. Jekyll in the ring, because, so I go in the ring, and I'm ready to pumped up and everything, and he wouldn't tie up with me. And I said, Jesus Christ, Frank. And then all of a sudden he left the ring. And this is the people were going crazy, and I ran halfway up the ramp, and he went in the locker room, and I ran right in the locker room. I said, what the hell's the matter? He said to me, just fly like this, just like we're talking right now. He says, Jim, don't worry about it. It has nothing to do with you. And I said, Frank, this is a big match. We have to go out there. He said, no. And I said, Frank, please. And he finally came out and gave me a little comeback and then took off. Well, 2 weeks later, I'm wrestling him in my hometown, St. Paul, at the Civic Center, and we're semi-main event. And I thought, oh my God, he's going to kill my career in my hometown. Because he's the type of guy, if he wanted to, he wouldn't sell you. All of a sudden he could just, So I thought, and all of a sudden it's 8 o'clock, no Brody. 8:30, no Brody. And I said, oh, Jesus. 9:15, he comes in the door, and we're going to go on in about 15 minutes. We didn't even get a chance to talk. And he gave me a hell of a match. I mean, he came at me, and he says, move, and boom, 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 and then I bam, 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 and then he took off. And it saved the day, but I was scared to death that he was going to, pull one of his stunts.
Right.
I had another match with him in Indianapolis where we're both going to the ring, and he jumps me on the aisle in the middle of the damn building, and he's got me with 2 chairs pinned on my neck, and I was kicking like a son of a gun. We never got in the ring.
Wow.
Never got in the ring, and the referee's out there counting them out, Oh, but I want to finish one story. I'm going to New York, and I'm working, and then we're in Kansas City, and we're both in the little place to eat breakfast. and he was going to Puerto Rico, and the next day he got killed.
Wow, July.
Yeah, and I felt so bad because I just talked to him, and he told me, he says, I hate working in Puerto Rico, but, it's a living. And then, the next day I found out about it, and I was just...
What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, it was horrible. He got killed, and the guys got away with it.
Right.
And there was some guys from our country, U.S. boys that saw it and never did a damn thing. Never. They were afraid to. I guess I don't know what I'd do, but at the same time, when you see one of your guys actually get killed, that's pretty hard to walk away from.
I know Tony was in the locker room, Dutch and Savio and a couple other guys. So Samoans were down there.
That's horrible.
I was going to ask you more about I was going to ask you more about Bruiser Brody. Have any other Bruiser Brody stories, or is that? I mean, did he have a lot of heat with Verne after all the stuff that he pulled?
Yeah, I think he did.
All right.
I think he did. And Frank's whole idea was to screw the promoter before they screwed him, and that's what he told me too. Man, he was a likable guy and a talented big guy, and gosh, and I knew it wasn't going to last long with Verne because Verne wouldn't tolerate anybody that didn't, get under his thumb.
You worked Georgia Championship Wrestling too, right?
Yes.
Was Ole there as booker at the time, or was it?
Ole was there, and there was somebody else. There was the brothers. There was
Briscoes?
No. There was one was real tall, and one was, doggone it, what the heck is this? I can't think of his name now. But when I got fired in Charlotte in '79, I had about 6 to 8 week deal before I was going to go to Japan with Nick.
Right.
So I went over to work for Barnett, and I worked in Georgia, and I stayed at the Hunter's Glen, or not Hunter's Glen, but whatever that little place was where all the boys were staying, and Sullivan was there, and Ted DiBiase was there, and it was a real depressing area because here I just, I had a nice little home in Charlotte, sold it, my kids and my wife were up in Minneapolis, and I'm down here in this doggone motel, efficiency, and everybody's taking acid, and you never know what was going to go on, and I thought, oh God, how am I going to last here?
What are some crazy stories from Georgia with the drugs and all?
Oh gosh, it was just, I'll never forget, this happened, and I don't know what time period it was, but there was this place, and it was open all hours, and it had a real classy name. It was sort of a real cowboy place.
Right.
And Wahoo and Dickie Slater were there. And Wahoo gets in a fight with the guy, and this guy pulls out a gun, so they're out in the doggone parking lot, and Wahoo's fighting this guy over the gun, and the gun goes off, it ricochets and hits Dick Slater in the calf. So Dick Slater and Wahoo takes the gun from the guy, hits him in the face, just knocks him out, bing, 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 and then throws the gun away. And meanwhile, Slater he has cowboy boot filled up with blood in a matter of 2 seconds. So they tourniquet him off, bring him to the hospital, and the police said, what the hell happened? And Wahoo said there was a sniper in the parking lot.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, you were working in the AWA when Vince Jr. took over and started expanding. Did you think you would put all the territories out of business?
I did. And the reason why is I thought that everybody, that the capability that Vince had with Dick Ebersol and the group of people that he had in New York to make things happen, really told the wrestler, the talent throughout the country that, no matter what you've been involved with before, this is where it's heading, and you better get there quick, otherwise there might not be a place. So as guys were leaving, and you could see it throughout the whole area, all over, that he was going to take over the whole thing.
You think Verne should have sold early on?
Yep.
He had the opportunity to,
Yep.
I think, right? I think Mean Gene told us the story. He was offered like
$7 million or
Yeah.
something? Yeah. And $7 million, and Greg would have a job for life, and
Right.
Verne said, F you.
Yep, and he hung up on him or something.
Yeah.
I think Mean Gene was there when it
Oh, God, what a stupid thing. Jeez. And just the change of fortunes, Verne lost everything, and...
Was Verne out of touch by the time this all went down? Do you think he was kind of out of touch with the
Well,
boss?
I think his ego he had been on the high and mighty for so long and had been such a huge impact on wrestling in the Midwest that I don't think that he really thought that this could happen to him.
Right.
And, everybody sooner or later, falls, and he did, and it was sad because you hated to see him keep throwing money, trying to keep things going, and whatever he did was always a couple notches lower than, New York.
How did you end up in the WWF?
Well, Hulk had left, and I still had a pretty good relationship with him, and I just said, hey, I've had enough here at the AWA. Is there an opportunity for me? And let me know. Well, George Scott was a booker. He called me, and he says, yeah, we can bring you in. And I said, and George had fired me, down in North Carolina, and I asked him, I said, well, we're not going to have any hard feelings. And he says, no, we start all over again. And I said, okay.
Why did you get fired in Crockett territory?
Well, I'll tell you the real reason. Cosro and I were going to work with this gimmick boot in a small town, and they wanted me to do an hour with them in the small town. I refused to do it. I said, I'm not going to do it. And here's what happened. Cosro said he had a bad back. He hurt his back, and they told us to do an hour, and I said, well, you had a sore back. We'll do something else where you get DQ'd. So when George heard that, I said, Cosro hurt his back. We couldn't do the hour, so he got DQ'd. So then he brings Cosro in, and Cosro told him he didn't tell me that he had a bad back. Huh. So he put all the heat on me, and I says, fuck, George. Excuse me. I said, you got to do what you got to do, and that's what he did. He fired me.
What were your initial impressions of Vince? Because I remember reading an interview that you did that you never really got along with Vince from day one. Day one. Can you talk about that?
Well, I think Vince, and this I saw with other talent too. He'd much rather have the talent working for him than his competitors. So I fell into that category. And I remember the very first time I did an interview, it was up at Poughkeepsie, and we were doing an interview for Minneapolis. And, I was, a humble baby face. And Vince was listening, and he says, oh, my God, another Bob Backlund. That's what he said. And I said, oh, man, right then. And that was day one. And I thought, oh, I'm not going to get along with this guy. And I never did. And I knew the only reason why he had me there, and the reason why he had Brian there, was Hulk. Right. Hulk was friends with both of us. And, I thought we had a good team. We had a good gimmick with the Killer Bees. And I don't know if I'm rushing any of your...
Well, I was going to ask you, did you know that you and Brian would team right away?
No. I didn't want a team. I wanted to be by myself. I'd had enough of tag team, and I thought, I can, make a living being just Jim Brunzell or Jumpin' Jim. But the opportunity, the way they had so many guys, they had 60 guys. So I don't know how many tag teams they had. They had lots. So I'll never forget, what's his name, Lanny Poffo had two of these damn black and yellow tights, and Brian and I wore them, and we were the Killer Bees.
Were you promised a big push before you got into the territory?
No.
Okay.
Mm-mm. He just said that. Oh, I remember he'd say, I told him I had made $85,000. He says, oh, you'll make a lot more than that.
Did you?
Not much more. We had a couple good years, $150,000, but we worked our ass off for it. Plus, we were wrestling 27 days a month, and that was a different town every night.
Right. I was going to ask you about the travel coming up.
Horrible.
You were known for your drop kick. How did you get so much height on it?
I'd always been gifted with... I was a high jumper in high school. I was a state champion, indoor and outdoor, and I had 36-inch vertical jump for a white kid. That was pretty good. So I established that I could jump in the ring, so, drop kick was just like second nature to me. And I must have thrown 10,000 drop kicks, and as a result of that, I had to have a shoulder replacement.
Oh, wow.
Because when I come down and break the fall, I broke it on this left forearm, and it pushed. So I completely ruined the joint. So I had 3 operations, and 2 years ago I finally had this thing redone. And I've had that, a knee, and a hip. So that high flying sort of took its toll on me.
Initial thoughts of teaming with Bryan, and did you like the Killer Bee gimmick?
Well, when I first thought of it, and I thought, oh God, here we're going to be a tag team again. But what could I do? If that was our lot, I said I welcomed it. Bryan was a good guy. We got along well. Good worker. And the deal with, they never really took that mass deal to the point where they could have. They promised, they said, oh yeah, you guys are going to have the belts. Well, they never gave us the belts. I remember the first time we went to Australia, we were making $5,000 a week. And then Vince says, hey, I'd like to have you guys go to Australia on our initial run there. And I said, oh, great. I said, how much will we make? And he says, $2,500. And I said, well, Vince, why would we want to go to Australia for $2,500 when we're making $5,000 a week here? And he says, don't worry, the next time you go, I'll double it. So he sent us there for $2,500, and then he never sent us back. He got us.
Right. Memories of the big event. It was like one of the big shows before pay-per-view.
Yes. Oh, God.
I don't remember who you worked.
I can't remember. I remember there was one, and I can't remember if that was King of the Ring or big event. Do you know what town it was in?
I do not.
Okay. Well, I remember one time there was, and I don't know if this was exactly the same thing, but the King of the Ring was in Boston, outside at the football field, and I had to wrestle 5 times that day. And the night before, we were in Newark partying, and I mean partying like heck. It was Roddy Piper, myself, Greg Valentine, Don Morocco, Adrian Adonis, and Pedro Morales. And when we came to have our blood pressure checked in Boston, everybody was like 195 over 110. And the doctor says, what the hell were you guys doing? And we said, we were drinking. And they said, no, you were doing a lot more than that. But I had to work 5 times that, and two draws.
I think you actually worked with Dory and Jesse Barr.
Oh, the big event?
Yes.
in Toronto, Canada.
Yes.
Yes. And we were next, that was, and I have a picture that I'll show you that was in the paper the next day. It was probably the best dropkick picture ever taken of me. And there was 70,000 people there. And the big match was Orndorff against Hogan.
Yep.
It was huge. I mean, that was, to me, that was one of the biggest, it was the biggest outdoor attended wrestling match ever in North America. And I don't know, have they done anything bigger than that other than the Silver Dome?
Right, I was going to say WrestleMania 3. Yeah. You actually worked WrestleMania 3, memories of WrestleMania 3?
Well, I was a little disappointed in the finish because Bryan and I had worked real hard, and we're working with, Nikolai and the Sheik, and then they have Jim Duggan come in with the board and then get you disqualified, and then you be happy with him because he did. It just didn't make sense to me, and it was sort of like a blow-off match. We should have won the match, somehow. Let Khosrow or what's the name get counted out of the ring. We didn't have to beat him, but and I think the timing of that, they put us on right before Hulk and Andre, so everybody was,
right.
They didn't want to see us, they could have put us on second or third.
Sheik has always, been very vocal about Bryan Blair, and he actually talked about that match, and he wasn't happy with Bryan. What are your thoughts on the Iron Sheik and his comments on Bryan? You think he's just working the gimmick, or you think there was really legit heat there between the two?
Geez, I don't know, because, and Khosrow I've known since day one, and he's really been, he's changed. I mean, he's a different man mentally. And
from all the drugs and stuff?
Yes. I mean, you can't continue to do that and not think, you can't think reasonably. And I remember the last time I think I was at one of these, we were in New Jersey, and they did some sort of a deal for, they had a roast for the Sheik. And the Sheik, I left because what's his name said something, was really off color, mentioned something
Scott
about
Hall, about Owens.
Yeah, that was horrible. I left right after that. And then I heard that Khosrow came over and slapped Bryan in the ear. And I thought, oh, geez. And I know they were going to try to work a little gimmick in it. And I thought, geez. But I don't know, and I heard some of the rantings of Cosro, you know, on what's the guy, the big radio guy, disc jockey?
Howard Stern?
Yes,
Yeah.
that. And then he had a YouTube clip, and I thought, Jesus, Cosro, you're going to get yourself thrown in the mental hospital. You know, and I can't remember. He's got a guy who books him around from...
Eric Sims.
Yes. Is he still doing it?
He'll be here this weekend.
Oh, jeez. Is Cosro going to be here?
The Sheik's off this weekend.
Is he?
Yeah, so.
How's he doing?
He's doing pretty good. Yeah, he's still good.
Well, I could tell you something off. I'll tell you off camera.
Okay, alright, cool. How come you guys dropped the mass confusion gimmick? That was just because of The Office wanted you guys to drop it? Or?
Well, here's what happened. They had us in an 8-man tag, and they had us with George the Animal Steel and Coco, and then all 4 of us got the doggone mask on. It killed it. You know, It was funnier than hell. It was funny watching that match, but, you know, you have Coco doing his dance, and we all got the doggone gimmick masks on, and, you know, I'll never forget the time we were in Buffalo on TV against the Hearts, and we had a hell of a match, and that was the first time we did the mask, and we beat them. 1, 2, 3, bam, 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 and they, you know, wrong guy was in there, blah, blah, blah. If they would have continued with that, they could have drawn money with that, but they didn't. They just sort of snapped it off.
Whose idea was the mask gimmick to begin with? Office or?
I really don't know.
Okay. You once said that you have to have an ego in this business. What did you mean by that?
Well, you have to have an ego because if you don't have that confidence in yourself that you project, you'll get stomped all over. I mean, you know, your opponents will take advantage of you, the promoters will take advantage of you, and you have to have, you have to have a certain persona that what you stand for.
Memories of when Superstar Billy Graham returned to the WWF at the time.
Yeah, well, he was getting so beat up, and you know, and when I first started, he was incredible stud. I mean, I used to see him come and do TV, and Wayne the Wall Coleman. I will never forget. I picked up a magazine and it showed that's his real name, you know,
right.
And showed him bench pressing almost 600 pounds. And I remember he used to come to TV in Minneapolis right when I was starting, when I was going to camp, and he'd have a big 2-pound porterhouse steak that he had grilled, and he'd be chewing that all day long, and then he'd have a half gallon of iced tea, and that's what he ate all day long, you know. And then I watched him in matches with Wahoo, and Wahoo used to beat the shit out of him. I mean, those strap matches, he had welts all over him, and poor Graham used to come into he said, oh man, he says, I can't take this anymore, right. You know. But he was a great, and I haven't seen him since a couple years ago. I saw him in Carteret.
Carteret. Jersey.
Yeah.
What about Beefcake and Valentine? You guys worked with those guys?
Yes.
Of those matches?
Well, I was, you know, they were champions there for a fair amount of time. And nothing against Eddie, you know, but I think that, you know, that was a big favor to Hulk.
Yeah.
And it sort of pissed me off because I thought we had good matches with them, and I thought that would be the time to do it. And then we could have worked to deal with the Hearts. But, you know, and I'll never forget, we were working in Rockford, and Greg broke my hand, Valentine. The only time I really had a broken bone other than the nose, real bad injury, and he broke my hand in Rockford. And I thought, oh God, and I could feel it popping. It hurt like a son of a gun. So I told Brian, I said, I broke my hand, and Brian didn't think I did, you know. So I said, well, I'm going to the rest of the town. So my hand swelled up. I flew home the next day. They waited one day to put the cast on, and then I met Brian, and I had to wear a cast for like 6 weeks. We won more matches with that cast because, you know, we do a little gimmick where the ref didn't see, and I'd cold cock him, you know. And, you know, other than that, that was the only good thing that came out of working with Beefcake and Valentine, although I still see that Greg's still working.
It's crazy, right?
He's
still looks the same.
Yeah, he's 6 months older than me.
What about a Heart Foundation, Brett and Jim? You had some great matches with those guys.
Good matches. Very hard to work with Jim.
A lot of people say that.
It was just uncontrolled. Had a lot of raw talent, but no psychology. Brett was very good in the ring. We had great matches. As a matter of fact, Brett and I had a couple really good matches in Philly, like a 30-minute. We had one at I think Nassau Coliseum too. But Brett and I always had good matches, and the Hearts and the Bees had good matches too. It's just that there was a little bit of you just never knew where Jimmy was coming from, and he was very hard to work with.
Right. A lot of people say that.
Oh God, he was hard to work, and he was very lucky. He was lucky that he was in that position, because in any other territory he might have been, gone.
Randy Savage, you got to work a little bit with Randy in
Yes.
WWF. Memories of your matches with Randy?
Matter of fact, that's when towards the end Vince had me there and Brian had left, and I hated to do it. I was doing jobs on TV, but I needed the money, and so he'd work me in with. I worked with Ted DiBiase, and then I worked with Randy one match, and I can't remember what it was, but I still have it. And we had a hell of a match. He gave me a lot of the match, and he comes off the ropes, and I hit him with the drop kick, and I bloodied his mouth real bad. And I thought, oh Christ, he's going to come up swinging, Right. But we had a hell of a match, and afterwards, when he and I walked through the, curtain, Vince was there, and he says, "That's one of the best TV matches I've ever had. Thank you." And it made me feel good.
Right.
And I thanked Randy too, because Randy didn't have to do that. He could have, damn near guzzled me if he wanted to, and what could I do? We're on TV.
What was he like outside the ring?
Randy was from the old school, and he was very protective of himself, and he sort of, I felt that he never got close to anybody. And, his dad was a wrestler, and I think that, and he was very good to me, and he was so easy to work with. And he had such a great opportunity here because, when he was down south, he was a good worker, but he never made any money.
Right.
He saved money, but he never made any money. Here he came, and he became a millionaire. And he just kept on going and going and going. And he was very, very concerned about his position and to keep it the way it was, not to rock the boat, save as much money as possible, don't make any waves, and that's what he did. And Elizabeth was with him, and I remember him and Elizabeth and Randy, they'd all share in the same room, because they were so frugal.
Right.
And they'd all, split a pizza. And he was never very open, but a couple times I brought my young kids to the matches, and I think he missed that, not having kids, and I felt bad for him, towards the end, because I did see him. We went to a Springsteen show in Tampa, and we were all backstage, and Randy was there, and he was sort of out of it, and he was with a group of people, and I'd never seen him that way, and this was in 2000, 2001, maybe it was 2003.
I think that's when he was with George, maybe.
Yeah.
The blonde.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
So then I hadn't seen him, and I heard he, tried to be a rapper, and then I heard he was sort of a loner over in Florida, and Bobby Heenan said he'd seen him once in a while. And then when I found out he got killed, I just, oh God, that's a shame. And that guy never got anything he didn't pay cash for. He bought a Mercedes, a Cadillac, condo, everything he paid cash for it.
Right,
he never took out a loan.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
You also got to work with Flair, I guess, at WWF, right?
Yes, a couple times.
What are your memories of those matches?
Oh, well, I had worked with Rick in Mid-Atlantic, and we had done, I think, three or four Broadways together. And working with him in the WWE was, Rick always gave a match. He'd put the guy over, and then, somehow or other he'd beat him. And it was fun working with him because it was like a night off. Although, I'll tell you a real quick story, and this is relating back to Anderson, South Dakota.
Right.
Or South Carolina, I don't know. Do we have time to tell?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Okay, so we're in this old building. It's hot as hell. And it had to be about 95 degrees in this building. There's no air conditioning. So we're going to do a Broadway. And here's the way George Scott wants us to start this match. Rick jumps me. I make a little comeback. I put the figure 4 on him. He submits. But the bell doesn't ring, so we got to start over. So that's the premise. We do that. And then they ring the bell, and they said, the bell didn't ring, so you got to start. And we did an hour draw after that. And it was so frickin' hot, I thought I was going to die. At the end of the match, you could see our juggler coming through the neck. It was like 100 degrees. And George Scott, he'd throw those hour Broadways out like they were, handing out an ice cream cone.
Right. That's crazy. So going back to WWF, his match with you was awesome.
Yeah, I didn't have, I wasn't billed as a single. Right. And, I don't think it meant that much, but it was fun for me. And I think, it served its purpose.
You also guys worked with Demolition, Barry Darsow and Bill Eadie. Yep. Memories of working with those guys?
It was a hard match. It was a good match. We all worked hard. They were in the thick of things, so they didn't want to give too much. So it was a little harder for us because of their size and their, sort of like the Road Warriors. They're not going to sell that much, what makes it that much harder for a babyface. Because if you can't get a guy to sell and you do all the selling, the match is not going to be a very good match. Although we did have good matches. We had a hell of a match in New Orleans with them one time. Very good match and also in Houston.
Just house shows or TV?
Yeah,
or
a house show.
House shows.
Yeah.
Memories of Don Morocco and Bob Orton.
Oh boy. Well, Don Morocco sort of got me on my way down the one road. He was when I was starting, he was one of the young baby faces in the AWA, and good looking guy, 230 pounds, and he could do anything, and he had a very carefree attitude, much like the Lions do, and next thing I know, he left. Matter of fact, I helped moved him. I helped packed him out of his apartment, and he treated me to something that time, and I'd never been the same since. But and Bob Orton came. Greg and I went down to Georgia to work a week or 2 weeks in 1975 or 76. Bob Backlund was down there, Dickie Slater, the Briscoes, or Jerry Briscoe, and Bob Orton. And Greg and I worked with Orton and Slater down there, and we had a hell of a match. So they decided to bring Bob Orton to the AWA. And Bobby Orton, to me, out of my era, was the best in the ring in terms of his work and his timing. He was incredible. He was the best. He was like the Billy Robinson of that little group of guys. But at the same time, I think, and he worked as a heel, Billy Robinson was there in Minneapolis, and sort of, he worked with Bobby and sort of, didn't put Bobby over the way he should have. And I think Bobby got a bad taste in his mouth, and then Bobby's attitude changed completely when he went to the WWE, because Roddy had gotten, he says, this is the way we're going to work, and that's the way you work,
Right.
and I remember when Morocco and Bobby Orton Jr. were tagged up, and they were pissed off because they didn't get the belts, so they had to work with us, and they hated working with us. And it was funny because Bobby and I had gotten along so well in Minneapolis, and he and I had singles matches all the time, just great matches. He was incredible. I to this day, I think, him and Jake Roberts, as far as being in the ring, were the best mechanics. Timing, everything they did looked great. Now his kid is incredible too.
Yeah, Randy's awesome.
Yeah.
Memories of Bobby Heenan from around this period of time.
Well, Bobby was so involved in the WWF, and we'd see each other, fleeting. He might, there was 60 guys, there was 3 towns, 20 guys in a town. We worked 27 days a month. We never got to socialize with one another. He was really he was doing TV shows, he was doing vignettes, he was flying all over. Heck, he was managing how many different people. So even though, we still shared a unique friendship, but we really didn't work with one another, other than seeing each other at the show or, having a beer or rum or something at one of the... Although, it's funny, the very first time I worked in Madison Square Garden, he says, I'm going to take you out afterwards. So I work in Madison Square Garden. We're going, and it's like 1 o'clock, 1:30 at night, and we're going to this PJ something or others. And he says, this is a big club, people will be there. And he says, you can do anything you want in Manhattan. And he takes his pants down in the middle of the street. He's got no underwear on. And he just put them back up, and there's people walking all over. And I look at him and I say, holy Christ. Nothing, nobody even batted an eye.
Right.
That's Bobby Heenan.
You guys got to work with Davey Boy and Dynamite Kid.
Yes.
Memories of those matches.
Good matches. And I tell you, they were a hell of a team, too. I mean, Dynamite could do anything, and Davey was really talented. As a very strong guy. They had good psychology in the ring, good timing. There was another. I don't even think they were champions.
No, they had the belts a couple
times.
Did
they?
Yeah.
Okay. But I remember working a couple Broadways with them in Montreal, and I want to say Winnipeg, and we had a hell of a match with them. And Dynamite was always a screwball. I mean, he never knew what he was gonna do.
Big River.
Oh yeah, he was. I remember both of them were. We're wrestling in. We're doing TV someplace over in Maryland, and I remember I got done and I was going to leave. So I'm going to, and it was cold. I'm going into my locker to grab my jacket, and here Davey Boy's got shaving can. He's filling up my hood full of foam. And I says, Davey, what are you doing? He says, nothing, Jim, I'll see you tomorrow. And I got foam that much in the hood of my jacket, so I just scooped it out, didn't think anything of it. But do you remember when the Rooster?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. He comes to town, and for some reason or other, they were rough on him. And he used to have, he used to dress, he had the Flair gimmick, dressed real nice. Dynamite had cut his pants off. He'd cut the cuffs off up to about the calf,
right.
And they were like $100 pair of slacks. So Terry put them on, and he looked like he had capris on,
Right.
And this went on, and Terry never really said anything, or did anything. But Dynamite had just that's the type of guy he was.
Were you there for the Jacques Dynamite fight?
Yes.
What are your memories of that night?
I didn't like it, and it was totally planned. And it should have never happened. And I remember it was, we were eating lunch, and I had just left, and then I'd heard about it, and Jacques had timed it where, he wound up punching him, and he was sort of helpless. And it was a situation that I blame on Vince, because, you're the boss, you got to stop that right away. And, somebody could have really got hurt. I mean, somebody could have, there could have been somebody else, and they would have said, well, fuck him, I'll shoot him. And it was, I think it wasn't held, it wasn't dealt with right, They sort of moved him. This guy was over here, and they talked to him, and they said, so-and-so, if you do that again, you're both fired, blah, 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 which was good, but they should have done, it should have been said before it happened. And I don't think Dynamite was ever the same after that.
I was going to ask you, was he this? Yeah.
I don't think so. He hit him pretty hard. I think he had a concussion. And, he whacked it. Jock was a big guy, and Dynamite was, just he wasn't expecting it. And all of a sudden you get cold-cocked from 3 yards away.
All right.
It was bad.
Memories of Ultimate Warrior.
Jeez. He was a chiropractor, and other than looking incredible, I'll never forget the first time I saw him. We went to Anaheim, L.A., and I see this kid backstage, and he had a slab of muscle on his lats, and I looked at him and I thought, is this guy real? And then I see he eventually he came. Guy didn't know anything about wrestling. Vince loved him. Had no timing. He had $1 million body. He made $2 or $3 million, and I felt sorry for him in a way because he was thrown into a predicament that nobody really liked him.
Right.
But he still benefited from it. And I can tell you a couple of quick ones. I remember one time we're in Florida, Fort Stewart, and I knew he was a chiropractor, and I said, Jim, I says, can you adjust my neck? And he didn't like to adjust necks, and he says, sure. So he feels where my neck is out, and he adjusts me so freaking hard. It felt like I had a lightning bolt go down my neck all the way into my toes, both sides. So I never asked him again.
Right.
So I got to tell you another story about him, and this is a rib that Kurt Hennig did. We're wrestling in L.A., and we're going to go to the China Club. This is a hot place out there, big movie stars. So we got a limousine, and there's Ray Traylor, Kurt, myself, Brian, and what's his name? Heltwig. So we had a couple drinks, and Kurt puts Halcyon in Heltwig's drink. And he didn't drink much, he had like 2 drinks, but he put like 2 or 3 Halcyon, and Voyer starts, going, just acting real strange. And they had they had Wayne Newton, and they had the guitar player, God dang, I'll think of his name now, hopefully. But it was a real eclectic deal at this China Club, and we left. So we're in the limousine, and Voyer could barely talk. He goes, I don't know what happened, but and all of a sudden he starts puking. So they roll down the window, and they're holding his ass out the window while he's puking. And Ray Traylor and Kurt are laughing their ass off. And I thought, oh, that was a bad rib. You shouldn't rib. I mean, when you mix, drugs
allergic reactions.
Yeah, drugs and alcohol are not good. And poor Helwig didn't even know the next day. He thought he just drank too much because he wasn't a drinker,
Let's see, going back to... give me 2 seconds.
Okay.
Questions kind of got messed up. Okay. Did you feel you were lied to in the WWE about the tag team titles at all? Because you guys got a big push, but you guys never got the straps.
Well, I think they manipulated us for what they wanted out of us, and that's the reality of wrestling. There's a saying about wrestling, and it can be true, and I want to make sure I say it right, but you're deceived a lot. I mean, the public's deceived, and so are the guys, and there's a lot of greed involved. And that's basically, pro wrestling. There's a lot of deception.
I guess when Brian finally left, did you feel that you were going to be, put down to a lower, spot on the cards?
Without a doubt. I knew it. And it was out in California. We were supposed to do a job for Arn Anderson and Tully. And Brian got wind of it, and he says, I ain't going. So he just left.
That was the end of it.
Yeah. That was the end of the bees. So I got there, and they put Lanny Poffo in with Arn and Tully. And actually, we had a pretty good match, and then they wound up double-teaming me and beat me. And I hated to see the handwriting on the wall, but, you get to the point you're 40 years old, there's no other place to wrestle. And that's the sad thing about pro wrestling. It doesn't prepare you for nothing. And you can look at them all now. You can look at all the stars from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and I bet there's less than 2% that are financially set. All the rest of the guys are scraping, trying to get a job or working, selling cars or, selling toilet paper like me.
Did you feel when Brian left that he screwed you at all? Was there heat between you guys?
Nah, I was disappointed, but I sort of saw the writing on the wall. I knew it was going to end. I knew that Vince had let a number of guys go, Kenny Patera, he let Morocco go, all in the same, the first, he hired and fired me 3 different times. So I worked with him straight from 85 to 87, and then I worked all the way up until 93. A little bit, I take guys, guys that get hurt, and they pull me in. I remember Brett's brother, Owen, got hurt, and I took his spot for a couple weeks. He had hurt his knee. And so I fulfilled a need for me and for Vince. I filled in, and then I got paid.
Memories of Andre?
Andre was something. I'll tell you a quick story about Andre. He was always good to me, and I remember he'd always come into the AWA, and he'd come in about November, fall, and he'd start the season off, and we'd have the big battle royal. So we did TV, and we had a little time off, and it was about 5 miles to my house, and I said, "You want to come over to my house, and you can sit and relax, and then we'll go to the building." And he said, "Okay." So he comes to the house, and he walks up. My wife never met him. My wife's 5'1", and she opens the door, and he's standing on the below the pedestal, and he's looking eyeball to eyeball, and then he gives her a little hug, and he comes in to the house, and my daughter, who's 2 years old, sees him and runs into her room and scared, and our dog ran into our room, and so here Andre, and he said, "Your daughter scared of me, Jim," and I said, "Well," and I just, you felt the human side of the story. You felt sorry for him because he couldn't go anywhere. Then there was another time in the AWA, we used to wrestle in Moline and Peoria. Well, we wrestled in Peoria, and then we were driving to Moline. So I'm driving a Cadillac. Andre was coming with me. We stopped at a beer place, and he says, "I want to get a 12-pack." So he gets a 12-pack. He's sitting in the front seat, and I'm driving. I'm going too fast. All of a sudden, the cop pulls me over. We've only gone out of town 10 miles. So the cop says, "You were speeding." I said, "Well, officer," I said, we just wrestled in Peoria, and we're going back to Moline. We got to catch a flight in the morning, and I probably did go too fast." And he says to Andre, he says, "What do you got in the bag?" And Andre says, "Beer." And he says, "What?" And Andre says, "Beer." And the cop says, "Get out of the car." And Andre gets out of the car, and this cop had no idea he was Andre the Giant, and he backed up. So he grabs the bag, and he opens up the 12-pack, and there's 7 beers gone in 10 miles. And he said to me, "Did you drink any of that beer?" And I said, "No, I had a Pepsi in my hand." And he said to Andre, he said, "Did you drink those 7 beers?" And he said, "Yeah, in 10 miles, he drank 7 beers.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So the cop says, "Well," he says, "I'm going to put this beer in your trunk," and he said, "I'm going to give you a speeding ticket, and you can go." So I'm getting in the car, and I think, "Oh God, thank God he didn't get me for, driving with booze in the." So I'm driving, and we're going about 40 miles down the road, and Andre says, "Pull over," and I said, "What for?" He says, "I want the rest of the beer."
That's awesome. Hulk Hogan, going back to the Hulkster, a lot of guys we've done interviews said when he got to the WWE or WWF back then that his personality changed. He got the big push, and he was pretty much all for himself. Did you see the big change in Hogan?
I did, and I didn't. And part of it goes with the territory. I mean, he was the golden goose. They did everything for him. I mean, he was treated, like a champion. He was making $10 million a year. He was in a different, rarefied air compared to the rest of us. And as Hulk Hogan went, the WWF at that time went. Vince couldn't have done it without him. And he was just incredible. And the only thing that concerns me about Terry is that I think he should have quit. How much is enough?
Right, exactly. Kind of tarnishing your legacy.
Yeah.
How did you end up leaving the WWE?
I had talked to Pat Patterson, and they had fired me, hired me again. And then I just told Pat, I said, I could see where we were going, and I know there was no plans other than Vince wanted me to, put every doggone heel he could have on TV, put him over. And my pride got to me, and I said, "You know what, I'm going to have to bite the bullet, but I can't do this anymore." And then we just said, that's it. And then, to be honest with you, Brian and I had a litigation against Vince. We signed a contract. We were forced into signing a contract that said from outside revenue we get 25% of the gross. Well, in reality, he paid us 8% of the net. So he violated that contract. Vince was always saying, you got to fulfill your end of the contract. So we fulfilled our end of the contract, but it really bothered me to know how much money that he was stealing from, legally stealing from all the talent.
Right.
So we set up a litigation, and it took 5 years. We settled out of court, but in the settlement, Vince more or less said that we'd get no more royalties, or and that was fine because you get a royalty check once a year, and it's $149.95 or something like that. But it just bothered me because he was making so much money, and especially with these dolls. I remember when the first set of dolls came out, guys like Orndorff, Sheik, they were getting $90,000 in a royalty check. When Brian and I got ours, it was $12,000.
Crazy.
So what had happened was the pay scale went from this to this because Vince says, geez, I'm paying these guys too much money. And one of the secrets to a promoter is he never should allow a wrestler to get independent. Because if they get independent, then they don't need that promoter as much as they used to. So the money has all to do with that.
Right. True. After the WWE, you ended up at you didn't go to WCW at all. Why is that? Did you try to get in WCW? No. Okay.
I was burnt out.
Okay. You did end up working for Herb Abrams.
Yes.
Any crazy stories with
Oh,
Herb?
gosh, he was a crazy guy. I mean, he was fun-loving, and he didn't know what the hell he was doing. He wanted the glamour and the schmutz of it, So I remember he ran a show in Vegas and at the MGM, and
right.
And he had a good crowd there, but he wound up owing everybody money, and he had his wife in a suite, and then he had a hooker in the next suite, and I know he died shortly. A couple.
Naked, cocaine.
Yeah, he was a character.
You actually went back to work for Vince after that, just a couple shots here and there. How did that come about?
Again, I worked up until '93.
Right.
And I think what had happened was, more or less, I was sort of on call when somebody got hurt and they needed a baby face, they'd call me. And that's sort of what Pat Patterson, who was still involved, had worked out for me. And basically what I did, I sort of stayed off TV then. I didn't want to do the TV. I just told him I'm not going to do the TV anymore, because I'm working with these guys that can't work, and I'm supposed to put them over, and I'm not going to do it.
How did Vince react to all that?
Well, Vince had an idea that he was the king,
Right.
and he was, and you can't knock success, but the way he manipulated and actually conned a lot of his talent, there was a lot of guys that would have done anything for him, and at the same time they were doing this, they were ruining their lives. I mean, I still think to this day that if they would have had somebody working for the WWF that would counsel them on drugs, not counsel them on drugs per se, but counsel them on drug interactions with other drugs, because that's what was killing all these guys. They're taking these sedatives with stimulants and sleeping pills and in drinking, and you'd think that there would be somebody involved with the WWF saying, and I don't know, they might have done it, but when I was there, they just said, hey, you got a pee test.
Right. Well, now they have the wellness policy, so.
Okay.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about the drug scene and the drinking scene and, the travel and all that. I mean, obviously, from all the interviews that we've done with the guys, they say that the travel was a big problem, and that's why, we did an interview with Piper, and he would talk about, in the morning doing uppers, and then after the match doing downers, and,
sure,
this crazy lifestyle. How big was the party scene in the WWF when you were there?
Well, I think everybody was in the same boat, and if you're married or you're single, or if you got a significant other, and you're on the road for 27 days a month, and you care for that person or your family, it's awful hard. So you're trying to find something to, nurse you through it. And it could have been, it could be booze, it could be gambling, it could be women, and the drugs was the easy thing. I took sleeping pills. I took speed early in my career to drive. All of us was using cocaine because it was the in thing to do in the 80s. And, steroids, you almost had to use steroids because if you didn't, you couldn't compete because there is a good side of steroids because steroids do help you recuperate. The only thing bad about steroids is they become psychologically addictive, and then people, instead of cycling them, wind up staying on them all the time. And then you have your heart issues and your liver issues and your bone issues and your tears and your muscles. And, I used steroids for off and on from, 74 to, 80, 85, 86 until they started. I remember the guy in, where the hell was it? Pennsylvania, Johnstown.
Right.
Yeah, Dr. Zahorian. He'd put a stethoscope up to your chest and he'd say, Jim, I've got Anavar for you, 100 pills for $40. I got Halcyon, 40 pills for $100. And he was just selling drugs. And he got his, he got a horrible, yeah. But there was so much drug use, and it was, just a matter of time before somebody was going to fly off the handle.
Did you see a lot of guys fly off the handle?
Well, I saw some. Jim Neidhart was almost uncontrollable. There was a couple other guys. Most of the guys didn't go in the ring, under the influence. They might have had pot or something like that, or maybe a Benny, but most of the heavy drugs were used after the matches. And that's where the problem resulted in, because guys were, getting on the airplanes and yelling and drinking beer and shouting and throwing things at one another. And although I have no idea if this was drug related or not, but I saw the worst fight of my career between Danny Spivey and Adrian Adonis in Flint, Michigan. Danny Spivey had just come to the WWF. Adrian had been there a little bit, and Adrian was sort of being heavy-handed with Danny Spivey. Well, everybody knew Danny Spivey, was a big kid, 6'7", 280, and he had a reputation from Tampa that he was a pretty tough son of a gun. Well, Danny Spivey had said that Adrian, was being real stiff with him, and he said, if he continues to be, I'm going to let him have it. So in Flint, Michigan, Bob Orton and I are watching. Jimmy Hart is with Adrian, and all of a sudden, Adrian puts a sleeper on Danny Spivey, and he's really got it on him hard. So Danny Spivey breaks it, and he hits Adrian, and he kicks him when he's down on the ground, and Adrian's out. And I'm looking, and I thought, oh, Jesus Christ. And Bob Orton runs, and we're trying to get Pat Patterson, who was the agent, to, see what he could do. So meanwhile, Danny Spivey comes to the locker room, and he's hotter than the son of a gun. So Adrian comes into our locker room and says to Danny Spivey, what are you trying to do? And he goes to leg dive him. Danny Spivey hit him with an uppercut so hard, he hit him right here, and his cheekbone came right through his cheek. And Adrian splatted right on the floor like a big mullet, and he couldn't do nothing. And if they wouldn't have pulled Danny off of him, he would have really messed him up. And Adrian was never the same after that. He had kicked him where he kicked him. His lip was completely cut in half here. So it was a flap, and then he had a big gouge where you could see the white cheekbone.
I've heard that story. That's crazy. Did you ever want to be a road agent at all for WWF?
I did. I applied.
What happened?
They said, well, keep you in mind. But Vince and I never got along, so I knew it was a long shot.
Right. You were in the AWA DVD, I believe, too. You participated in that.
Yes.
But did you like the way that turned out?
Yeah, for the most part. I know Greg Gagne didn't like it, but I thought it was pretty well done.
All right.
I thought they were pretty level about it, and I think they told a lot of the truth. And, the truth hurts in some case if you're a Gagne.
You actually you did do one WCW show for Slamboree, I believe.
Yes.
How did that come about?
I think Greg Gagne was starting to work for the WCW
right
at that time, and he wanted to know if I wanted to come in there and be in a tag team. And it was Wahoo, myself, and Jack Mulligan against Murdoch, snooker, and Morocco. And, jeez, I thought, oh, God, and, it was just sort of a haphazard mass. It was okay. I'll never forget Dick Murdoch decides to drop kick me, and the match was good. But I'll tell you they had a match that night between Nick Bockwinkel and Dory Funk Jr. Stole the show.
Right.
15 minutes. Incredible. And Dory and Nick had worked before. It was incredible. I mean, and they had a good house. I can't remember what it was. It was in Atlanta someplace. But, yeah, and then the next night, I was 2 nights later, I wound up doing a job on TV for Vince.
You actually worked for another company, AWF?
Yes.
It was kind of short-lived.
Yeah, who? No, I can't. You'll have to refresh my.
I don't remember who the promoter was. I just remember they had TV for a little bit, and then it went on.
Oh, yes, that was. I was the commissioner.
Right.
Yes, and I'm trying to think of the guy's name. He was from Chicago. He had a great idea. We wrestled rounds. I don't know if you ever saw any of the.
I do. I have some of the videos.
What'd you think?
It was good stuff.
Yeah, it was. But you can't compete against Vince. You
Right.
couldn't. There was nobody that would viably, and I think we did it in Florida. We Orlando, I think it was, or Tampa, that we what's his name? Tito was involved as a booker, and Sergeant Slaughter
Right.
was involved. And we had a good core of guys, and Bobby Orton Jr. was working, and Tito, and I thought, well, yeah, I can be a commissioner, and I was hoping for the best, but I could see right away that there was no outlet for him to do this. Now, I heard he lost all the money, and he invested quite a bit. I think it was his dad's money, too.
Do you still watch the business to this day?
I watch it once in a while, but to me, there's way too much talking. You get a guy that he comes into the ring, he grabs the microphone, and the other guy comes in the ring, and they talk for 2 or 3 minutes. There's no action. You can one guy's going to slap somebody, or another guy's going to stick his head in there, and it's so predictable. I think that Vince has gone through the cycle of just about anything that you can think of to do, he's done.
Right, it is true. What are your thoughts on all the deaths of the past 5 years in wrestling, and which has pretty much hit you the hardest?
Well, Kurt Hennig, it really hit me because I was with Kurt not too much. It was probably 2 or 3 weeks before that, and we were in a little casino, and he was working at the casino, and I went with him to his. We had a beer, and he had, we smoked a joint, and then he had some pills, and he was mixing all these pills, and I told him, I said, geez, Kurt, don't do that. I said, you can't mix the pills like that. And there was, Valium and some painkillers there, and he just laughed at me. And, that was the whole mentality of, there was a whole mess of those guys that thought that, and I love Kurt. He was a great guy and a great worker. And it was funny. There was about 5 or 6 of them, all from that same age, that had that mentality that they couldn't be told nothing,
What are your thoughts on the lack of kayfabe today?
You know what? I think Vince has exposed the business to the point where, people ask me, and before I used to say, but it's pretty hard to defend it. What I say is wrestling is an art. It was an art form. It really is. Because for years, people performed in the ring, and there was people out there watching, fans, and deep down in their heart, they say, well, this is set up. But a little part of their mind says, gosh, this really looks like competition. And when you can, when you watch two guys work to the point where, these people really get into it emotionally, it's a great thing. You see that, I don't see that anymore. That everything is so, nothing means anything in the ring anymore. There's so much boom, boom,
It's all
boom.
high spots now.
Yeah,
it's like storytelling.
There is no storytelling.
Right. Do you still have a passion for the business, and do you miss being a full-time wrestler?
The two biggest things I miss about the business is the money and the camaraderie. The rest you can have. I got to the point where physically, I couldn't do what I had done for years. And when you start hurting in the ring, and then you see the end of the line, it's hard to face because when you start, you're a young kid, and like young kids, they think they're never going to, they're invincible.
Right.
But I figured I had about 5,000 matches, and I was very, very fortunate. I had a great career. I have no regrets. The only regret I have, I should take that back, is I wish I would have quit a little sooner. Give myself an opportunity a little bit better to compete in the workforce, because when you come down to it, unless you're involved in a gym or work for the airlines or work for a building or stay in the wrestling business, it doesn't prepare you for anything.
I guess, is there anything you want to say to your fans out there that you never had a chance to say to before?
Jeez. I really am appreciative for all the people that, liked what I did in the ring. I always wanted to treat them special because I was a fan too. And they've been very good to me. I still get autograph requests, 2 or 3 a week. I don't have a website. I wish I would. And also, I'd like to, this is Bruce Springsteen's 62nd birthday tonight.
You're friends with him, right?
Yes.
How did you become friends with Bruce?
Well, it's a long story. I was just a huge fan from day one. I got off a plane off that 59919er, and I heard Jungle Land. And it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and the song sort of stuck with me, and they didn't say who the artist was. And I told my wife, I said, God, I heard a song. It was incredible. So then once I found out it was Bruce, in 75, Bruce was playing in Minneapolis, and he was going to play in the softball tournament that I was playing in, as celebrities, and he didn't show. His roadies came, and I had to wrestle in Rockford that night, so I didn't get a chance to see him. But I became a huge fan, and then I wrote a song called Badlands, and I used the melody and music from Badlands, and I wrote it about wrestling. And it was a picture disc, and I had to get the permission from John Landau, Bruce's manager, that I could promote this. And it was funny too, because this was right about in 83, 84. Bruce came out with Born in the USA, and he opened up in St. Paul for 10 shows. And the first night at 2 o'clock in the morning, I got backstage, and I wound up meeting Jim McDuffie, who was his personal aide. He's from Long Branch, New Jersey. So he came up to me, and I said, hey, I'm Jim Brunzell. I'm a local wrestler. Is there any chance of meeting Bruce? And Bruce came out, and it was 2 o'clock in the morning. He took some pictures. I gave him this tape of Badlands. He put it in his pocket. And then 2 weeks later, I saw him in Chicago at a match, and I signed an autograph for him, and he thanked me for it. And from that day on, we've probably seen Bruce 20 times.
That's
and
awesome.
he's been very good. He's signed pictures. I've got a lot of memorabilia, and I feel very privileged, to meet your idol.
Well, again, thanks for being here with us today with road stories and stuff that you've seen behind the scenes.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you again.
Yep.
Watch thousands of exclusive shoot interviews right now on TitleMatchNetwork.com.